When I was 8 years old, my brother said to me that if I gave him the rest of my sausage roll, then he would let me play my favorite PlayStation 1 game, The Muppets Race Mania if you're curious, and he'd let me play it for the rest of the day, and so I happily obliged. I gave him my sausage roll, but when we got home, he claimed he had no recollection of this deal, and so I got nothing from it. This was the first time that I felt betrayed by the lack of a promise being fulfilled, and ultimately, it's something that we've dealt with a lot in Minecraft since then, because over the last 15 years of game development, Mojang have added a lot to the game. New crafting recipes, structures, biomes, and even dimensions. But I would argue the bigger part of Minecraft history is the bit that hasn't truly been realized. Between the poisonous features, the developer mentions, the mob votes, and the split updates, and even the leaks, there are a large number of features, some of which were implemented into Minecraft duly, some of which took a little while to throw into the game, and many of which are unrealized even to this day. Indeed, I would argue that Minecraft is a game which has a whole host of unfinished promises, some of the biggest in the games industry, and so after 15 years of mining and crafting, we now have 15 years of unfulfilled promises. And so in today's video, there is a lot to go through, but we should start with the basic question of what even is a promise. Indeed, my brother really needs to study this section of the video.
There are, of course, many ways to define what a promise is, but we'll start with the simplest one because a promise is something you say you will do with the expectation that you will do it. Generally, you are not getting something in exchange for this. This is more akin to a verbal contract, and so when it comes to game development, especially Minecraft, I think we can say that it's largely a promise and not that second one, and this definition should stay roughly the same, but as game development is a complex industry with many moving parts, and Minecraft has such a large community, the very largest, that has such a big set of expectations, it's more likely than not that some people will be disappointed, and so the definition of promise can end up being a bit different. So when it comes to Minecraft and its long history of promises, we can extract the definition of a Minecraft promise and should be able to cover the long list of promises that Mojang has made. A Minecraft promise, in its simplest form, is something that Mojang says it will do for the game, and the community can expect it to happen pretty soon. If Mojang says they're going to add some new blocks in the next update, then the community has some new blocks to look forward to. But sometimes promises can be a bit more vague, like if a developer tweets something like this, it's not necessarily a promise, but lots of people look at it and see a brand new feature that is being worked on for the next update. However, going back to the community having large expectations, sometimes people will not just read a developer's words, sometimes literally ignoring it because this was the tweet he followed it up with, and sometimes look for clues that go against what people are explicitly saying. I think that this can't be counted as a promise in any way and is baseless speculation at best, and honestly a dangerous way to scare developers out of sharing things with us at worst, but in either case, looking for clues this way is not something the community is entirely untrained to do, because Minecraft themselves have shared many secret reveals via one of these little backgrounds of an image. Whether we're talking about 4J with their monitors hiding some new future update, or whether we're talking about this tweet from Corey showing powdered snow long before it ever came to the game, Minecraft developers have loved to be sneaky and show things in the background, and so that sort of extends the definition of a Minecraft promise somewhat. To put simply, a Minecraft promise doesn't have to just be something Mojang says for the community to expect, but also can include things that the community does expect based on what Mojang have said. Sometimes the community is right, and a lot of the times they are wrong, but that's just how it is. There is also another aspect to this second layer of promises as well, and that is the level of excitement that they can generate within the community. Thus, these promises can be used to generate this excitement and hype so that people are actively looking forward to what's to come. However, this can then also backfire, as has happened in several cases, which we can look at in the history of Minecraft promises.
Lanterns probably feel like an odd mention for this video. I mean, we know they exist in the game. They're these tiny little light-emitting blocks that are just a torch surrounded by iron. You can hang them on ceilings, or you can even make a soul variant of them, which has a much lower light level. Don't know why you'd want that. However, the point is they exist, so how can they be an unfinished promise? Well, if we go all the way back to 2010 and the original Halloween update, the very same one that added the Never fun fact, you'll notice that in this promotional material, there is a reference to a lantern. They say that if you use torches, they will eventually burn out, and Notch basically hinted that if you wanted to have a permanent source of light, you need to get the lantern. It's funny because this is something used in a promotional piece of material that later didn't make it into the game. I wonder if that's going to come up time and time again here. However, there is an interesting point to be made, which is that there is a light system in Minecraft right now, which is nothing like the light system that was suggested right here, and the reason behind that is that Notch immediately realized that this wasn't a popular idea.
I know a long time ago we heard that there might be lanterns, but then nothing happened, and we heard that torches might go out, but then it sort of dropped off. So are you ever gonna have lanterns or any other form of light?
I'm not entirely sure about why we didn't do the lanterns. I think I was really in love with the idea for a while. Then a lot of people said that they didn't like it, that they wanted the torches to stay permanent. So I think I mostly changed my mind because of perhaps the feedback I got for it. Yeah, but more forms of lightning, sure.
Even though it was a very good survival feature and it had some realism to it, that's how torches work in the real world, the truth is that no one is actually interested in a game where you have to go around your base relighting these things, and even though the lantern would have provided a solution, giving a problem to the player and forcing them to solve it is not as fun as actually encouraging players to do unique things. And so the lantern was shelved for almost a full decade until the Village and Pillage update was being floated around, and then it felt like a natural way to bring in the old lantern idea, but in a much more modern way, as effectively just a type of torch, one that you can hang from ceilings and use in more decorative ways. In my opinion, this is even worse than adding a feature for the sake of existing, because it literally exists for the sake of existing. It's just a pretty different type of torch. The least they could have done is give it some unique implementation, but in either case, this is a feature that had a unique game mechanic behind it, but the mechanic was so unpopular that it went away, and when it came back, it definitely lost the edge from it. This is I would say, a common theme of the Village and Pillage era of Minecraft, but I'd also say that I'm pretty hungry at this point. I should... Vegan sausage roll, the best. The Sky Dimension was first announced by Notch in May of 2011. Oh, I seem to have eaten most of my microphone. Gonna have to switch to another one, I think.
Notch even followed up these announcement images with the following tweet where he explicitly said that since PC Gamer made such a big deal of the Sky Dimension, I guess I'll have to finish it, consider it confirmed. This is an interesting case of a multiple levels deep promise, because it's not just showing images of something with the implication they'll be in Minecraft, it's literally a developer saying the word confirmed, and yet the actual feature we're referring to has still never been added. This is not the only time we'll see this as well. We have other features that got this exact same treatment over Minecraft's history, and it goes to show how saying you're going to do something doesn't always translate into doing that thing. And boy have I learned this lesson many times in my life. Anyway, the original design behind the mysterious new dimension was going to be for a dream world that you would magically go into sometimes when sleeping. Later on you would find a way to go there intentionally, and this dimension was going to be a part of the adventure update. However, the feature has been postponed, and we've got 3 reasons as to why. The first comes from this ancient 2011 interview Notch did.
Are you going to incorporate the Aether mod or Skylands into Minecraft?
We're not going to incorporate those mods, I think. I'm going to wait with adding the Skylands I was working on until the Nether is more fun.
After Notch left the company, we also had a clarification from Jeb that not only was the dimension one that he didn't have great ideas for, but also he felt like it wasn't a great idea to add it at the time because there were technical limitations on how the sun would work, because it would shine its ray on all of the different sides of the terrain, causing huge performance slowdowns. What is the obvious solution to the technical limitation of the sun? Well, you could perhaps remove the sun itself, and that is why they did that for the End Dimension, which is effectively a spiritual successor to the Sky Dimension, or Aether. This means that the Sky Dimension was pretty much replaced by the End, and the original Sky Dimension has become a scrap feature that you can only recreate now using world generation data packs. And it would probably be the most famous example of a feature like this were it not for the Red Dragon. Notch really is the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to Minecraft promises, because shortly before the Ender Dragon was set to release as Minecraft's first dragon mob, Notch teased that he would work on a slightly less dangerous and red dragon mob that would be an improvement over the Ender Dragon, as that dragon always destroyed terrain and would always be flying. Notch later doubled down on this idea in this Reddit thread where he said the Ender Dragon was made the way it was due to the technical challenges posed by it pathfinding around blocks, so the developers decided to make it cheat and just let it destroy blocks that it went through, and then he reiterated that he was interested in adding the red dragon variant that would be able to react properly to terrain. There was a bit of a small problem though, and Notch decided to step back from Minecraft development entirely after the 1.0 release, and creative control was given to Jeb. What happened to the red dragons then? Well, since Jeb was now in charge of Minecraft development, he was asked about the idea of red dragons later, and here's what he had to say in his very own Reddit thread. But it is quite interesting that Jeb said he needed to add the red dragon because Notch more or less promised red dragons. Jeb could just not do it. He was the new creative director of the game, but promises tend to stick in the community, as we'll talk about later in this video, so he still felt he needed to do so. Although the Red Dragon still hasn't materialized to this day, so it seems fair to assume that the Red Dragon idea fell out of favor with Mojang, and they hope that people will forget about it, which seems to be mostly true, to be fair, although given that it's being mentioned in this video, perhaps completely forgotten isn't. Anyway, it's interesting to note that Dinnerbone commented once again on the Red Dragon idea, and actually went back to the promised stance of the idea when he said the following in this tweet, and then even going back with this Reddit post saying that one day there would be a dragon. So clearly there is at least some division within Mojang, and perhaps the biggest example of a feature that hits this criteria is the modding or plugin API. Honestly, this is a long tale as old as Minecraft's history, with as many pieces as you'd expect for something that was first really mentioned in July of 2010, because Notch said that he would focus on an API after releasing Minecraft Alpha. However, as time passed and even beta released and the full release started to come up, there were all sorts of references to this, such as the API beta coming in beta 1.8, with the modding API being rebranded to the plugin API, and then a whole PC Gamer interview specifically about the plugin API. Then they decided actually they liked the modding API name a bit more, but they were committed to it, so much so that they did a whole panel about it at Minecon 2012, and then we have multiple interviews with Jeb where he specifically brings up the fact that there is going to be a modding API, and then a lot of silence. Despite the references at basically every Minecon since then, we have a simple clarification from Dinnerbone that yes, they are still taking huge steps towards an API, and that indeed they are still working on it. However, that was 5 years after it was initially referenced, and indeed that was 9 years before the present day, and indeed it hasn't really been mentioned in any significant sense since, and now it is a bit more of a meme in the technical Minecraft community because it would be incredibly handy for mod makers, and yet here we are without it. A great example of a feature that everyone wants to have happen, but yet which no one can get quite across the line, and perhaps that is a great way to explain all of these different options, because now we're going to have to talk about the biggest one. Yeah, that's right, it's time to talk about the mob vote, which ran from 2017 to 2023. There has been a long history of votes even before this, especially the long-famed alpaca versus llama poll that Jeb did, and originally Minecraft used to get feedback from the suggestions subreddit and the feedback website, which sort of operated on a vote-based system, but this was explicitly going to be a form of democracy which could take place at Minecon / Minecraft Earth / Minecraft Live. They've changed the names a lot, okay, but it was going to allow players to choose between multiple options to be added to the game. The first year they went very artistic, with Jeb having little hand-drawn sketches of each of the mobs. However, the idea was simple: you would get to pick one of these to be added to the game. This promise later grew with the addition of a biome vote, but it was simply put that the winner of each of these votes would be implemented into the next update, with the exception being 2019, where the biome vote winner actually got combined into the Caves and Cliffs update, so effectively made for a whole theme of a major update, which is its whole own set of promises by itself, by the way. But for now, I think we should talk about, well, what happens to the losers? Every single year, Minecraft was creating these great ideas, ones they thought people might like to vote into the game, and so what happened to them? Well, that's the main premise behind this being a promise, because implicitly, by holding a vote, you are saying the most popular idea will be added, and therefore the least popular will not be. In fact, for the first mob vote, they actually came out and explicitly said the other ideas will never be added to Minecraft, which means you'll never see any of these, at least in the base game. But what's really interesting is that when they switched to biome votes, they did say that all of the other biomes would be updated eventually. However, when I say they, I mean Maria Lemon, a Minecraft employee who no longer works for the company, and as for mobs, developers have said that the losing choices will get put back into the ideas library. Here's Olraf saying this is a yearly reminder, effectively saying that yeah, they could implement the idea. It's not that it's gone forever, but it's not that they ever actually have to add them. However, people have gotten very attached to each of the choices, and so any semblance of hope that their favorite mob or biome would be added or implemented, it's met with the immediate expectation that it will happen. In other words, another promise. It does make a lot of sense as to why Mojang eventually cancelled the votes to avoid making more promises, which they weren't necessarily able to fulfill, but we'll talk more about that later, right after the fletching table. This was first added to the game alongside all of the other new villager blocks as part of the Village and Pillage update. However, unlike many of these others, it didn't necessarily have a function. In fact, its only function was as a workstation block for those same Fletcher villagers, and the developers did say at the time that the block would receive a proper use in the next major themed update, along with the then also useless smithing table. Well, nothing happened with either of these blocks for the Buzzy Bees update, which could help you argue that that wasn't a major update, but the next update after this was the Never update, and this certainly was a major themed update in every sense of that word, and it seemed like the update would finally add functionality to these two useless blocks from the Village and Pillage. Well, one of these blocks got functionality. The smithing table was allowed to upgrade diamond equipment into netherite. However, the fletching table remained useless and still does to this day. In fact, the smithing table has been expanded since then, with even more uses in the Trail and Tail update, being able to smith armor trims for your armor, and the fletching table is, well, I mean, you could use it to build a house, I guess. This one is really interesting because unlike previous promises where they kept on reiterating it and coming back to it, in the case of the fletching table, they made the promise the one time, they missed their deadline, and then they've just tried to pretend that it's never happened since, which might actually be a more effective way to help people understand that nope, they don't have any plans for the fletching table, and the plans they did have clearly died somewhere in the Never update, and so when will the day come that it finally gets a use? Well, I think it might be a little while longer, just like how the same is true for the combat tests, which are a really interesting set of features that were developed in a very different way, but the story starts in February of 2016 when the combat update was released for Minecraft Java Edition. That is when the chaos started, which has truly never ended, because almost immediately the community reacted to the update with such a backlash that it caused a huge rift in the community, with many players opting not to update their game and to continue playing with the old combat system. The developers saw this negative reception, and while they didn't reverse the changes for Java Edition, they did realize the new combat system wouldn't work so well in other control schemes like touch and controller, so they decided to postpone all of the combat changes for both the Legacy Console Editions and the Pocket Edition, as it was known at the time. What this has resulted in is a massive disparity between Bedrock Edition, which is the successor to both Legacy Console and Pocket Edition, and the Java Edition, with significant features like full offhand functionality and fast regeneration from saturation still missing to this day. Clearly, there was a need to resolve this, and so in 2019, a new project started by Jeb aimed to do precisely that. This was the combat tests, with a first version already making huge changes, such as players only being able to attack when a weapon was at cooldown, rather than doing less damage if they tried before, as well as different attack reach for different weapons, increasing attack speed for non-sword weapons, and making shields only activate while sneaking. Oh, that sounds familiar. From 2019 to 2020, more combat tests were released by Jeb, with changes like letting your health regenerate for much longer, consuming an item being interrupted while getting attacked, and increasing attack speed for swords, and adding a new enchantment for axes that would significantly buff them while nerfing shields significantly. A lot of these combat changes were very appreciated and very excitable to the PvP community on Java, but at the same time they were saying that a key part of what they were experimenting with, as they literally clarified in the V5 combat snapshot, was that this will come to Bedrock eventually, and that once they're happy with it, they'll work on the roadmap. However, this was V5, eventually they got up to V8, and do you know when that was? August of 2020. Jeb did say at that year's Minecraft Live that he was basically doing these combat tests just as a way to test the system's work before he dumped it on the team, and clearly at that point onwards, we've learned from Mojang's recount that during the pandemic they felt like there was far too much dumped on them, and so effectively the combat test has been sitting there on the side waiting for Mojang to have some spare capacity to develop it, and although the developers have said they will eventually continue the work from them, they've just said at some point. And so in the vague way that promises need to be made now, this is one of those sets of features that is very needed, that has been developed, but that just currently needs to be put on hold, which is a bit of a shame and kind of ties into our next one, the Caves and Cliffs update. The story is very well known by the community on this one, and it's possibly Minecraft's biggest controversial promise ever, with memes as recent as October of 2024 talking about how it's really the Caves and Cliffs update part 6, because anytime there is a feature from the Caves and Cliffs update which comes back into the game, it's proof that they wanted to add these but just weren't able to. This was an update which was going to be a combination not just of a previous year's mob vote winner, but also of the much wanted cave update. This was going to be Minecraft's biggest update yet, and the hype behind it was unreal, especially because it was still going to take place in the usual one-year update cycle that Minecraft had promised and followed for several years to this date. However, as summer 2021 got closer and their one-year deadline started to run out, it became very clear to many in the community that based on the snapshots that were releasing, there was no way this update was going to happen in the way the community expected, and so the decision was made to split the update in twain.
Hello, I'm Agnes, and today Henrik and myself will talk a bit about the Caves and Cliffs update and why we have split it into two releases, and we hope that we will be able to clarify some things around the split as well.
This was initially received positively by the community as players recognised the pressure the developers were under. However, many changed their tune once they actually got to play with the first half of the update. Understandably, many were quite disappointed as they realised they were only playing half an update and not the full update they were promised. Honestly, the batch of features were interesting, but it felt like they were just trying to get an update out to meet a deadline, and so even when Caves and Cliffs Part Part 2 came out, and it had many of the features that were missing. It still didn't have all of the features that were initially promised, with things like the Deep Dark biome and its sculpt blocks, the Warden mob, the Goat Horn, the archaeology system, and even the long-awaited bundle. This was an update which took substantially longer than normal, was delivered in a suboptimal way, and also was missing a large number of features. This arguably set on path a huge amount of delays, which Minecraft would then have to follow going onwards, because next year's update, the Wild update, had just 6 months of development, and indeed, within that 6-month development cycle, they made some very interesting promises, such as the fact that they were going to add a mangrove swamp, which they did, but also they showed off concept art with a brand new birch forest and all of the new foliage, and also they explicitly mentioned that they were going to be adding fireflies. If only Mojang had realized what they were doing when they announced fireflies. It seems like a fairly simple feature to add ambience to the biome. However, it has become one of the biggest sticks which the community has used to beat Mojang with, and ultimately they did end up cancelling these, but they did so in an Ask Mojang video, and they did so like this.
Fireflies was originally part of the plan for the Wild update. We wanted them to be a food source for the new frogs. But then we got great feedback from you guys in a lovely community, and you taught us that a lot of species of fireflies and firebugs that are out there are poisonous to toads and frogs. And of course we didn't want to add that into our game. So we provided the frogs with a safer food source, the tiny slimes. And fireflies are sadly no longer part of the plans for the Wild update. We still think that the fireflies are super interesting as an idea and a concept, and they're part of our ideas library. But we don't have any concrete plans for adding them in any upcoming update. As with the birch forest, that is a little bit different. At Minecraft Live, we did show some concept art with birch forest improvements. However, concept art is not a commitment, and this time around, birch forest improvement is not something that we have continued working with.
Oh, it just hurts to watch back, I'm gonna be honest with you. I think this is such a big PR loss on multiple fronts. The first one is that they reference the fireflies, and obviously this is a valid reason you might say, oh, you don't want to hurt the animals, but no, this is something the Minecraft community has heard time and time again. It is a game that literally rewards you for riding a pig off a cliff. You don't get to play the animal cruelty card, and if you actually speak to Minecraft developers, the ones who no doubt made the decision, almost all of them will say, yeah, the performance loss of having all of these tiny mobs versus the actual gameplay value is next to none. They worked out a better food source for them, and they prefer it that way, with animal cruelty being the secondary concern. That is a much more compelling case than, ooh, we've got to protect those animals. And the same is true for the birch forest. I mean, they said, if you read between the lines there, she's like, yeah, well, the team just decided there wasn't enough value in doing it, basically. But rather than leading with that, she says concept art is not a commitment, and so this kind of started a bit of hostility, which kind of continues to this day with promises and Mojang. Lots of things which they said would be in the game have not followed in there, and indeed Mojang's attempts to catch up with themselves, to catch up with the things that they feel like they have promised, have led to the delay in updates, which you could argue has continued all the way until, October of 2024. There have been many other promises made in Minecraft's history, but it is worth mentioning that if you want to read about all of the things that have been mentioned in some form or another, there's a great Minecraft wiki article about specifically that. There are so many features which seem like they are coming, but after the years we have a vague vibe that maybe they're not. And we could also mention the feedback website, where they encourage the community to leave their feature suggestions, and there are lots of things which are officially under review and so are sort of in the ideas library, if such a thing exists. But again, the point is there are lots of promises, and hopefully we've highlighted some of the most important ones. But now let's talk about the fulfillment of those same promises. Of course, the future holds many surprises, and we can hope that Mojang continues to surprise us like they've done over the past 15 years, but we can also talk about what's likely to happen given their history. It's like when you start dating someone, you can look at their history and it's a good indication of what might come in the future. It's not a perfect indicator, and indeed they might be entirely off on that front, but I think it's important to look at the history and use it to define what's going to come towards you, and whether that's going to be something crazy and scary or whether that's going to be something predictable and familiar. And with Minecraft, I think we can say for sure that we're going to expect more Minecraft promises. Probably some by Mojang themselves, definitely some short-term ones like adding a new block here or there, but also some longer term ones. I mean, Mojang have said that they're looking to improve the multiplayer experience as one of their long-term initiatives, and the fact that they're saying this publicly is almost them deliberately trying to tell us that yes, keep us honest to this, if we haven't done anything to change the multiplayer of Minecraft besides rename the game Minecraft Play with Friends, then that would be an unfulfilled promise. We can also expect some promises that aren't explicitly made by Mojang themselves, but rather will form out of community expectations. These are, of course, risky promises to make to ourselves, but also quite unavoidable. Whether we try to or not, these are going to happen, and so when it comes to the fulfillment of promises, it's important that we look at it and say that we're going to see some unfulfilled promises, and some of the existing promises from the last 15 years are going to remain unfulfilled, and more promises will join them, although probably not forever, as Mojang does eventually get around to doing some things. Take the addition of bundles, for example, originally announced back in 2020, but came in 2024 in the Bundles of Bravery. To go back even further, the addition of the cherry tree was something teased all the way back in 2013, and yet it has come to the game nonetheless. The same could be said for the mangrove swamp and the chest boat, and even the frog too, and in fact, these are such popular fulfilled promises that now Mojang uses them in all of their marketing. The game would be much worse if Mojang said, yeah, we don't need to go back to that, and that is something which I think is important to remember, both as players of the game, but hopefully for Mojang themselves to realize too. Even though there are lots of fun ideas that haven't been mentioned anywhere yet, there are so many great ones that sit in the backlog, and this backlog is going to grow, and so it's important that they regularly look at it to see what could fit in a given update or indeed drop. Now, Mojang has changed the delivery of their game updates, opting to release content more frequently in the aforementioned drops instead, and that is going to be a big shift in how the company does things for the game, but it also presents a unique opportunity for Mojang. As these game drops will occur at a much quicker pace than the previous once-a-year major updates, it could allow Mojang to actually get through their backlog, because the problem with the major updates was that the developers only had one central focus for the span of an entire year. Whether that be revamping the entire Nether, or indeed the entire world generation for the overworld, there are definitely lots of discussions that can be had with how drops will perform compared to major updates, but the main point for the sake of this video is that drops can let Mojang have multiple focuses in a year compared to a major update. We don't just have to have the trial chambers, we can also have a mesa biome with a vulture, for example. Alternatively, we could have a major new biome come as part of a drop, and instead of having a brand new mob no one has heard of, like the Creaking, it could have the red dragon come instead. Drops have been occurring for almost a year now, and in that time, Mojang have done the following things regarding old promises. They overhauled the bat's model and texture, not explicitly promised, but the community has been expecting it since basically day one. They added new variants of wolves to the game, something we've had for cats for a very long time, and of course, hardcore mode on Bedrock. How could I forget it? In fact, you probably can't forget it watching this video, but the fact that they added all of these things in the first few drops is proof that Mojang genuinely wants to use drops to better connect with the community, and this is something which is objectively good. I think that it's going to be a great thing, and that Mojang will take advantage of the opportunity they have with these drops to actually deliver on many of their promises, and I would say that given their track record, it certainly looks very promising. Ugh.
Yeah, when the weatherman said that it was going to be a great day today, the weatherman lied to me. He promised me there was only a 10% chance of rain. This is a lot more than a 10% chance, I would say. They actually promised it would snow, if you want to know the real weather forecast. This also isn't snow. Also, this area is pretty sad. I bet they were promised that one day this industrial future of the country would pay them some wealth. But instead, it's just a bunch of birds who get to enjoy these concrete boats. Sad.